hello, and welcome everybody to our podcast, Original Bliss. We are honored to have a very distinguished guest with us, who I will introduce in a moment. Original Bliss is part of Green Heiress Productions and Green Heiress LLC. And my name is Dr. Susan Amoros, and I'm very pleased to have with us today Professor Monique MEAD. And Monique, you represent a fantastic and I think what will be a very compelling cross-section of the musical and sound worlds. And I think it's just an honor to have someone with your background and experience coming to us with what I think are going to be unique perspectives. And it would be wonderful if we could just learn a little bit about the origin story that you bring to the table in terms of how you first connected to music itself, and your journey initially as a trained musician.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be on your podcast. My origins of musicianship probably began before I was even born. There was a lot of singing in our family. My father played the piano for pleasure every evening. And I always remember hearing, Chopin being played as I would go to bed. There was a lot of singing in our home. My mother was Iranian, grew up in Germany, and music is very much part of that culture. And so we grew up singing, children's songs and just hearing music on our record player. And so I remember one of my earliest moments in understanding the power of music was, I was 7 years old. It was summer. It was hot. We had no air conditioning in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I was growing up, in a family of 7. And all the 5 kids had chicken pox. And I was just miserable. And my mom was not the type to give us an antihistamine or aspirin. No, we went the natural route.
She was ahead of her time.
Yeah, totally. We had the garden in the back, everything. So I was just so miserable and itching. And then she put on this record of Schubert's Trout Quintet. And I noticed that within minutes of listening to that, I calmed down.
Oh, wow.
The itching went away completely. And I was so relieved. And that made a huge impression on me.
How old were you?
I was 7 at the
Oh,
time.
my goodness.
Yeah. So at that time, I had already begun to learn the piano because that's what we had in our house. And my older sister was playing the piano. But that's also the age where I discovered the violin. And I had gone to a friend's house to sleep over. We didn't have a TV, but they did. And they had hee-haw on. And so this guy,
Classic.
shirt is he was like, I was like jamming around. And I thought, now that looks like fun. So I came on and told my mom, I want to play the violin. And she thought, yeah, well, we'll see how serious she is about that. And then she took me to an orchestra concert, and there was a little girl who was a child prodigy. She was 12 years old, named Delana Jensen, who wore this white dress, and she was a soloist playing Sibelius Concerto in front of that orchestra. And I saw that girl, and I was like, I knew in my soul that is what I was going to do.
You knew.
And I wasn't going to be one of the players sitting in the orchestra. I wanted to be that person standing in front and being the soloist. And I somehow just knew. And they got me, my grandparents then bought me a violin for Christmas. And it was my best friend ever since then. I had a bond with that. It was my child. It was my best friend. It was my comfort.
And you were so young.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And what a supportive family, too.
But I heard that sound, and I knew that was the sound of my soul. That sound of the violin. So my parents are fortunately very supportive and really sacrificed a lot for me to have lessons my whole life. And then later, when I decided to study music, I seriously thought about doing music therapy because I was so interested in the effect of music on people and how it could change us. And but at that time, that was not that popular or that trendy. And my teacher, who was a very serious Russian professor, said, "No, we're going into performance, right?" And I did, and I studied at Indiana University. My colleague was Joshua Bell. You know,
Oh,
it was a very competitive,
yes.
very big school program. And then I had the opportunity of going on tour with Leonard Bernstein and traveling all through Europe, living in a castle in Germany, rehearsing with him and playing in all the great concert halls of the world when I was 19.
Gosh.
And that made a huge impression. And I again realized the power that music has. And he was a very good storyteller. So he could talk about music in ways that people who had never attended an orchestra concert
It found accessible.
right. And they'd find this, they'd have an experience, right? And that was my first also experience of what one might call being in the flow or being in presence, was playing at a concert with Bernstein where all of a sudden I wasn't actually playing the notes, but the notes were playing me. And I felt this connection with the music, with the, sky above me, because this was an open air concert in an ancient amphitheater in ancient Greece, actually.
That's what I was picturing.
Yeah. In Ephesus, and it was transformational. So that was a deeply spiritual experience that I'd had with music.
Sounds like it.
And, these things kind of light the way.
I have to ask, Monique, while you are having these penetratingly in-depth spiritual awakenings and experiences through music and your craft, did you find that others were identifying in the same way in terms of your peers, or were you beginning to notice that that was setting you a bit apart from your fellow professionals? I'm curious.
Well, it's interesting you should ask, because that was my gross assumption, is that people who were musicians went home after the concert and wrote poetry by moonlight and were deeply, spiritual people, because that is what it meant to me.
All you knew.
And
Beautifully
I was actually quite shocked at what actually goes on after the concerts.
Yeah.
And the fact that that's not it at all. And people's perspectives. So you can create this music because you are very well trained in that moment to create that thing. What it means then to somebody else is what it means to them.
So entirely individualistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had to ask because I imagine in that context, you may have actually been a rare bird, and I see where you've taken music, and I only know a bit, and it is unique. And I imagine, too, having such an early and powerful, influential mentor, if you will, you were starting to see the power of bridging, because he could do just that. And that alchemical manifestation that's going on between the audience and the person producing the experience. Did you find that that's what began to prepare you for what would later be your leading voice and your capacity to teach and lead in that way?
Leonard Bernstein made a significant impact on my life. And his ability to make things accessible, as you were saying, was a leading thing. And for me, it was a combination of two things. One is being observant as to what is it that the world around me needs right now, right? And then the other thing is my own suffering. Okay, those two things led me closer to the things I ultimately was choosing as my profession. And so the first phase of that was I was looking in the world of classical music that I knew and loved, and I saw all of these terrific players and colleagues that I had graduated with who were all struggling to get jobs. Orchestra positions are quite rare.
I think about that just whenever I was looking at some of your biography.
Yeah.
I know a bit about that walk from friends and family, and it's torturous.
So here you've devoted your entire life. You've given up your childhood because you got to be in that practice room, right?
Yes.
And now what are you going to do? And then I'm looking, and I was subbing, I was studying at the Indianapolis Symphony, and I was seeing that, yeah, not that many people were coming, right? And why is that? So I thought maybe I should invest myself in making classical music more accessible to young people. And I love kids. I always had a very good rapport with children. And so I decided to dedicate myself to doing Bernstein style, family, youth and family concerts in a way that was very, I don't know, had an element of showbiz, was interactive and so forth. And so long story short, I wound up in Germany doing these. And so
in Germany.
So, I already spoke German. I'd lived in Germany. I had that German was not a problem for me. And I would just look around the town. So what kind of launched me there was that one of the cities, which was quite a depressed city, they had a coal mining thing that had shut down, and they said the bank was supporting the local orchestra, and they were like, "We would like something. You haven't had children's concerts here in 20 years. Can you do something?" And so I looked around, and I didn't see anything. I'm like, what do people do here?
Yeah.
There were no trees. Everything was just, just run down. There was a large Turkish population because that's who had come over to work in those mines. But I saw everywhere.
East or west?
It's west, so it's near Dusseldorf. It's an area, let's say, imagine Pittsburgh 50 years ago.
Right.
And then like an outlying part of Pittsburgh, like Clareton, for example, right?
Yeah.
That sort of vibe, right? And so I saw that there were these little blue and white flags everywhere. And I was like, people, what are these? What are these flags? And they said, well, that's our soccer team. And they were very proud of their soccer team. And then I knew it's like, if I can make a connection between soccer that they all know and love and music and get one of their soccer players on the stage, then we have something to talk about here. And that's what I did. I got a gown in their blue, their royal blue, and I got the soccer player, and I put together an entire program that was about, the teams and the players and the virtuosity, and it was very visual and got a lot of people involved. And it was wildly successful because, get this.
So exciting. It's a great lesson, though, for anybody trying to launch something in a relative desert, right?
I was desperate. Really, it was just desperation. And that caught their attention, right? It's like, oh, that's really interesting. And then I started doing that with Bayern München and with other cities. But that also got the attention on, no, this person knows how to take whatever's going on in that's interesting to people and combine it with music in a way that is going to be moving the needle on that. So I did that for many, many years, like 30 years. Both in Germany and then moved here to Pittsburgh about 20 years ago. And so that was kind of the first phase, right? And then when it kind of got into the sound healing portion of it, in 2019, I had done this huge tour called Beethoven in the Face of Adversity. I myself in 2018 had to sort of learn the Beethoven Violin Concerto, which was one of the most difficult concertos, right? Under very difficult circumstances. I was getting divorced. I had 2 teenagers. I had to, leave my house. It was extremely stressful for me. And I didn't think I'd be able to learn that concerto in that, that amount of time with all of these existential stressors going on. And when I was ready to give up, I think Beethoven sort of came to me and said, listen, if I was able to write this when I was deaf and depressed, like maybe you can figure out how to play it under your circumstances, And I realized actually that this music was about overcoming adversity. That's what it was about. And if I could immerse myself in that, perhaps I would find the strength in a way of doing it that kind of sublimates that experience into something that is higher, that's more beautiful, that's better. It doesn't have to be this battle. Perhaps in doing this, I can find forgiveness and a more beautiful way forward.
How beautiful. How beautifully articulated, too. You had mentioned earlier the facet, which is pain, that has brought you along to this point in your journey of creativity. And what you're describing is piercing resistance itself. And doesn't that make us the adaptive creatures we are? And why would we try to pierce resistance unless we wanted to get to the other side, if you will?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that journey through that intermediate, what I'm guessing is a bit of a protracted suffering as you're working your way through and transcending pain? I think it's something our audience relates to, no matter where we're coming from, whether we've ever held a microphone, a violin, or listened, to something that we've found moving. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you? Because at this point, you are a mature, refined professional, and yet you're engaging difficulty with difficulty, rigor with rigor, right? The context you're in, and then you're taking on.
Yes. Yeah. We have so many hours in the day, and then we have so much brain capacity, and we can choose where to focus that. So a lot of times when we have, when we're trying to survive, when we feel like there is no time and I'm just trying to get through one day at a time, we believe that there then is simply no room for this fluff that we call beauty, creativity, meditation, well-being, a walk in nature.
Tremendous point.
Right? Like that we think is a luxury. It's something else. We have to take care of business first.
It may make us vulnerable when we're already vulnerable. It might distract us from a defense.
Possibly. Or we might just see that as a luxury, as something extra, as well, if I take time to do this, well, then I'm not spending time worrying about getting to the next step, and we believe that worrying is productive in some way.
Oh, we'll have to have you back for that conversation, right? That's one in of itself, an interesting topic.
And so the simple fact that, yes, one of the stressors was I have to get up and play this concerto in front of an orchestra and, do it in a professional way. That was a stressor, so that forced me to have to make the time to practice that music every day. And because if I didn't, I was going to fail at that. And so, by having to do that, it was almost like somebody forcing you to take time, forcing you to meditate, forcing you to be in that space. And what that does is it creates a lens through which you see and operate in the rest of your life. And so if I'm engaging with beauty, with truth, with depth, if I'm doing something that is activating both sides of my brain, that is organizing it, where I'm actually literally taking in through the practice of doing something, a gem that has value, that has peace, that has expression, that has survived all of these centuries that I'm engaging with, it changes me. And that means that now when I go and I look at those difficult legal papers or things, it's with a lens of beauty, of compassion. We approach it in a different way. And so it doesn't feel as arduous and as burdensome. We're going to get through it one way or the other. The question is, can we do it? And for me, I really wanted to do it with as much grace as possible.
Yes. Oh, you've said so much, and there's so much I'd love to dive into. I couldn't help but think that in many ways, and this is a byproduct, a purposeful byproduct of many Eastern practices and orthodoxies, is you are creating what the Chinese would call the golden or magical elixir, meaning you're shifting your chemistry and the way you vibrate through a particular ritual, a particular approach. You're changing your state of being, and in doing so, you're creating a magic bullet. You're creating a medicine, as we would say in the indigenous practices, East and West would say, a medicine in a way. And when you're talking, it truly is, in its own way, an expression of that which is, again, uniquely human. We're always working with and yet at the same time transcending our power for self-awareness so that it can work for us and not against us. You mentioned worry and how much energy and distraction that creates, how much energy it takes away from our creativity, right?
It does.
In many ways. Can you talk a little bit about that piece of it? How the worry can distract you from creating and manifesting better for yourself, and how you successfully avoided it by really elevating with grace your own being.
Worry is inherently a constricting emotion and state of being.
Binding.
Right. So that pulls us in. And, somebody who's worried, right, is this worry, stress, and it's inherently self-absorbed. Right?
True.
And when we're in a creative process, right, that is inherently expansive. It inherently speaks to things that the potential of something happening, the potential of something new. There's a sense of connection there that has to go, even if it's connection with higher states of your own consciousness. There's a connection, there's a searching outside of yourself. And perhaps there's also a sense of who is this for? Who am I creating this for? So that would be a connection with other people, either present or potential. And that's what you were speaking about actually shifting your state of consciousness. So when we're approaching life from a place of constriction, I think of it, if you think of us as a singing bowl, right? And then you take a hard mallet that is very constricted, like a wooden mallet against a singing bowl. You're going to get like, ding, it's going to be a hard resonant thing. But then if you take a mallet that is a little softer on the side and it's hollow, and then you go on the same bowl, you get this rich and deep resonance. And that's how I take that, just how we approach life. We approach life in a state of constriction. You're going to get that harshness and resistance coming right back at you. And if you approach it from a space of softness and openness, there's a whole other layer of overtones and possibilities that you're going to be able to unleash.
You can be inviting in the power of the cosmos,
right,
or you can be pushing it away, or at least constraining it,
and straining it.
which seems like an awful waste of energy.
Exactly. It's your life. It's your life there. The potential is there within you for both, right? And then so how can we then consciously shift our state of being? And for me, that is the reason I'm doing the sound healing now. That's what's the most rewarding thing for me is when I see people come in with like this, and where do I put my shoes and what do I do? And right.
Right.
And there's this kind of energy. And then when I see people leave, just like this, I know what their next day is going to be like. I know that actually affects their relationships, their sleep, everything, because they've put themselves in a state that they are now able to create a different sort of resonance with the world around them.
Oh, I could talk to you for a month at least about all of this because it resonates so much with what I do as well. And I see that in my own practice. This piece I'd love to hear about, which involves you personally, is when did you and how did you, the moment you determined to shift into sound healing as part of your repertoire, and how did you begin?
Interestingly, it has to do with that Beethoven concerto. So once I had overcome my own self and I stood on that stage and I played that concerto, there was such a sense of freedom, of overcoming that I felt there. And that concerto for me was so powerful in terms of overcoming adversity that it's something that I wanted to share with others. And so I created a program called Beethoven in the Face of Adversity, where I pledged to donate 50 performances of these, because I had turned 50 that year, in 250 days, because it was going to be Beethoven's 250th birthday.
I read a bit about that. Now I understand why the 50. That's fantastic.
Right. And
talk about resonance.
Right. And it was all about this overcoming. And I would do it for people who had, suffered serious adversity. And it just happened that the Tree of Life had just happened, right? Shooting. So I had people who were the families of those victims who invited me in to play for them. And they said, this is the only time where our mind has not had to be tortured with the thought of that. I played with folks who was, sometimes it was single people at home with ALS, couldn't move a muscle at all. Or people who were in chronic pain. Management doctors had me come in groups. That was a lot of performances. It turned out to be not 50, but 63 because of the demand. And then I collected all their stories. I wanted to know what helped them overcome their adversity, what helped them get through the day with the adversities that they were carrying. And for me, it was collecting those stories of how people champion that way.
How fantastic you realize the power of it being a reciprocal loop. That really it really is, right? What's going out, but what's coming back to you. And you're out there really mining more and more source material to what I'm guessing build something, whether you actually were aware of how much you wanted to build something or not, right? Because you're in that creative flow, but it sounds like you had direction.
I wanted to share their stories. These are the unseen people and unheard people who were just in their bubble of pain, right? And I wanted to share that and then do a final concert after all that in Carnegie Music Hall, where I shared the stories and play the Beethoven concerto again on Beethoven's birthday, which I did. So that was kind of the final of that. But at the same time, that's kind of the transition into, I'm not playing these concerts because people are buying tickets to come hear me play. I'm playing these concerts because we are bonding over this power that we have as humans to overcome. And I can do that because I know how to play this concerto in such a way that it is going to touch you in that way, it can be transformative. And that at the highest level of musicianship is what you are wanting and able to do, is to be able to transform and heal through music. That's what I believe. And so then what happened the next year? Well, that was supposed to be Beethoven's big celebration year, 2020, and everything shut down.
Gosh.
COVID hit.
Yes.
And the concert halls went silent. Of course, Beethoven was deaf, so it was just the greatest irony. And, my being a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, at that time I was on the executive committee of the faculty senate, which meant I was aware of all of the issues, especially the mental health crisis that was going on with our students. And it was so difficult for them to learn. Everybody was stressed. And I thought, okay, well, now what? Now I can't perform. Right? Nobody can perform and nobody's on stage. And yet music is such a powerful thing. And so there are two things that I did. One is that I created a porch concert series that,
I love that.
Was for just helping the neighbors, get together at a distance outside. That ran for 7 months during that first pandemic year. And we still do it every year. Now it's like 250 people show up on the lawn to hear music every summer. So it's a way of creating community. That's one thing that hasn't stopped. And then the other was, well, I remembered then this experience I'd had in Mexico at this spa and resort where I performed called Rancho La Puerta, where I'd experienced my first sound bath, lying very, tense on the floor with my anxious little violin mind, and then having the sound of one singing bowl just going and wiping that all clean and coming out again in that sort of expanded state. And I thought, this is powerful. What is that?
Goodness.
And that had been
what
like
era
7 years prior, right? But I remember that I had read some books. And so I used my government stimulus check to buy a set of singing bowls. And at that time, my mother and a very dear friend of mine, who was like a second mother, had just both been diagnosed with cancer, very serious pancreatic cancer. And so there was another element of, sort of suffering and urgency there in my mind. And so I proceeded to figure out what to do with these bowls after, sort of taking a training and then speaking to the people who had done them at Rancho La Puerta. I recognized that as a musician, understanding that these are not just frequencies,
Right.
but that actually these are actually musical notes. And if you know what to do with them and how to combine them and how to use the elements of music, and you have an understanding of music therapy and psychology, and like you can actually do things that are very powerful and very intentional. With that. And so I worked over the pandemic to develop soundscapes and sequences that would have a positive impact.
My thought was, in knowing in a limited way what your background is and how you are stepping into this, which is unique. We hear a lot more nowadays about sound therapy in different forms and sound bathing, especially, but coming in with your specific background, sitting here thinking about what that training must have been, and then also imagining the entire time you were going to have your ideas about this, and it was going to be an incredibly organic process whereby you again step in with your special creativity and maybe recreate the connection to the bowls. And what I'm hearing is almost from moment one, Monique, you were approaching it in a sophisticated and prescriptive way. Can you bring to light in words how that differentiated your experience and what you were able to produce from maybe what is generally out there? That's a big ask, I realize.
Well, I did research on this, right? So I was very systematic about it. Once I came up with I'm just going to say a sequence of an entire sound bath sequence. For me, I put together 4 soundscapes in that sequence. Each one has a very specific intention. And intention's not like, oh, I just whatever intention, and I'm just gonna do whatever I want, and the intention will take care of it. No, it's like the intention coupled with the science of sound of what I'm doing and musical elements that actually support that in a way. So how that is different is that it's reliable, it's replicable.
Yes.
It's replicable. And in order to make it replicable, I invented a notation system. It's the first notation system for sound baths that exists. And it's for people who are non-musicians. So you can actually visually see how this soundscape unfolds, and knowing think of it more like a jazz chart than an actual like Mozart, every single note written out, right? Here are the principles. This is what you need to know if you want to ground people, which is a good idea at the very beginning. If people don't feel grounded and safe.
We're big on grounding here at Green Heiress. Ask anybody. Oh, you're speaking our language.
Yeah. So you have to start with that. If you're not grounded and you don't feel safe, you're not going to relax any further than that. Yeah. Right. And so that's the first thing. And so there are things that you can do musically to feel grounded and safe. And they have to do with repetition. Right? Repeating patterns. If you hear a pattern, like if you hear da 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 ding, you're like, what is that? Da 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 ding. Oh no, I get it. Okay, now I'm going to take you somewhere. Da 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 da. Now we can play with it and go somewhere.
Absolutely right.
So those are the repetition. Predictable patterns is one thing that makes people feel safe. There are also tonalities when you think of, let's say, major or minor or pentatonic. Each one of them, whether we realize it or not, because we listen to pop songs and music, all of those use the same principles, right? And we respond to it in a certain way.
We certainly do.
Right? And, just sort of as a rule of thumb, basically most sad songs are in a minor key. So I'm going to say, if I want then for people to be sort of, grounded, I'm going to actually use a major key. I'm going to have it be open, positive. I'm going to use my lowest bowls. I want, there are all these simple principles that if you can use those and combine them, you can combine them any way that you want, but you're going to achieve those results of grounding.
There's a methodology to this.
Yes.
And it's, as you said, replicable by people who are trained. Right. Do you do these trainings?
I do. I started developing the training at Carnegie Mellon University for my research because I wanted to train 6 practitioners. And then we established a sound bath at Carnegie Mellon University where we offer now 4 sound baths a week, free and open to the public. And every one of those is using my, the MEAD protocol, right? And then we did research because you can't do research on apples to oranges, right? So it has to be that people are coming in for pretty much a similar experience. And we did a mood and stress study at the beginning and a mood and stress study questionnaire at the end. And we collected 450. I mean, it was very popular and showed that after 45 minutes of that sound protocol, reduced stress by 70%, increased ability to relax and focus by 80%. And all of the other markers were improved as well. And so on a college campus,
what a service.
It's significant.
Yes, right. Yes. What a service to the community.
So that lives on to this day. And now Pitt has one run by medical students. I've trained them. I'm about to go to Jakarta and establish one in Indonesia as well. And so so my interest is, if something is working, right, to be able to make that replicable, to train people with in a very practical way, because they can always go off and do their own thing after that. But if you can start with something that works.
Baseline. What an important foundation. do you plan to take this to the general public, your training?
It is already out there. So I'm doing that here in Pittsburgh. I just completed my third training this year over at my studio at the Awareness and Wellness Center on Walnut Street.
Can you tell us a little bit for those who are interested, and I think our audience would be, where can they find you and find more information about these offerings?
Yeah. I'm on MONIQUEMEAD.com, and my trainings always end, and this is a lot of fun because I always end with what I call a mega surround sound bath. So far, we've done them in Heinz Chapel. We've done 3 this year. So imagine,
Yeah, the acoustics there are good.
yeah. So imagine 30 practitioners, right, with 70 plus singing bowls, and they're all around the edges, down this center aisle, up in the choir loft, right, and on the stage. I also involve, harp, violin, flute, just because, I mean, like actual music is deeply moving when you know how to play it, at that level. And so it is like, and people are lying on the pews, gazing up the stained glass windows, and these things sell out like 6 months in advance, right?
I can imagine.
And so to get my practitioners who have just been trained and they know exactly, what to do, and they're in that performing with 30 other people and something like that is a life-changing experience, right? And that's what I want to be their sort of their baptism into the world of sound healing, is to have a really beautiful experience like that.
Well, Professor Monique Mead, if you were to leave us with your parting, I would say, encouragement to those who are finding themselves in a period of desired transition, or perhaps they are met with great challenge personally, how would you guide them into a connection to creativity that would lead them through? Do you have any advice of how to get started?
We are all inherently creative spirits and souls. We are nature, don't forget. And nature is inherently creative. It's regenerating. It is finding new ways, new avenues, new ways of being in beauty all the time. And it's never perfect, ever. It's always a twist and a turn and an adaptation. And out of the most unlikely places, that's where beauty springs. So if we're open to understanding that our inherent nature is already creative, and then if it's hard to find that, if there's not already a passion project or a way of expressing that through, dance or poetry or knitting or whatever it might be, then perhaps going to a place that offers those opportunities. There are a lot of classes, even here, that I've seen that they give
Thanks
you
for the plug.
that really give you a first step, and I think
Really?
is so beautiful. And with other people who want to discover and just play in the sandbox. You can go to a sound bath, which will, I think, inherently just open you and put you in a frame of mind where you might begin to connect with yourself in a way of even knowing what direction you might like to go to engage in creativity.
That's a beautiful recommendation. And Monique, I can't thank you enough for being our guest today. It was just a privilege to connect with you and get to ask and hear your answers today. I hope you won't be a stranger. And I encourage everybody, again, if you mention your website to us.
Yes, MONIQUEMEAD.com is my website, and there you'll find my whole menu of sound baths, which is about 4 a week, and also the trainings, the mega surround sound baths, all the events that I'm doing here in Pittsburgh and beyond.
Thank you again. Thank you, our audience, for Original Bliss. Please don't be a stranger, and connect with us at ghretreats.com. Thanks.